Feel free to join us for that. With that, I'm very excited to invite up today's speaker. Please welcome Alison. Let's give her a warm welcome.
Thanks, Maddie. Hello, everyone. As Maddie mentioned, my name is Alison. I'm the lead pastor here at the River. Welcome to all of you who are here in the room, and also welcome to those of you tuning in via live stream. So we are currently in a sermon series called Cultivating Fruits of the Spirit. We're considering the concept of spiritual growth by delving into each of the fruits of the Spirit listed in Paul's letter to the Galatians. So far, we've considered love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, and generosity. And we have just a few left to consider. And today, I'm going to be speaking about gentleness. As I was preparing for this sermon and reflecting on the concept of gentleness, a number of images and phrases came to mind. I thought about a gentle breeze, a gentle stream, a gently sloping hill. I thought about gentle touch and gentle words and gentle encouragement. I thought about gentle souls and gentle giants and gentle parents. And as I thought about these words and phrases, it occurred to me that all of these things are gentle in comparison to something harsher. Harsher things like a gale force wind, a roaring river, a steep incline, like rough handling or sharp words or undue pressure, like overbearing personalities and violent beasts and severe disciplinarians. I also thought about how, in a world that increasingly equates might with right and that celebrates overt displays of power and control, how embodying gentleness may not always seem like an attractive choice. Because for many, gentleness is viewed as a liability. It is equated with weakness or the absence of power. But this is a misunderstanding of what gentleness really is. Gentleness is not a sign that strength is lacking. Rather, it's about how we choose to wield the strength that we have at our disposal. Some things are inherently gentle, but oftentimes it seems that there's some amount of choice involved to be gentle or not to be. I know this is true of me. I hold the capacities for both gentleness and harshness inside of me. And it's this dichotomy, this dual capacity that can make displays of gentleness so captivating to witness. You may not know this about me, but I'm a huge fan of primates of the world. Monkeys, apes, and so on. I've loved them my whole life. Some of my particular favorites are tamarins, lemurs, and gorillas. And as a child, I was particularly fascinated by a gorilla named Coco. For those of you who haven't heard of her before, Coco was a female Western lowland gorilla born in the San Francisco Zoo. Coco went on to become part of a research study through which she became famous for learning hundreds of ASL signs, for being the subject of 2 National Geographic cover stories, and for helping to transform human perceptions of animal intelligence and emotion. As an adult, as I've learned more, I now understand that there were a number of ethical issues surrounding Coco's treatment and living conditions, which makes me really sad. But as a kid, I wasn't aware of any of that. I was just a huge fan. I loved learning as much as I could about Coco and gorillas in general. I loved reading Coco's book, Coco's Kitten, about her relationship with a cat named Allball. And one of my most prized possessions, which I actually brought to college with me, was a giant stuffed gorilla that, of course, I named Coco. Part of what I found so captivating about Coco was her gentleness. And to help you understand what I'm talking about, I want us to watch a short clip of Coco interacting with the cat Allball. So let's watch the clip together.
The reason that it's stands out in people's memories is because there's an emotional surprise there. There's a giant gorilla with a tiny, tiny, tiny helpless kitten and being gentle and loving toward that kitten.
Coco rhymed a name for her new kitten. She called him All Ball because to her the cat looked like a little ball. Coco adored All Ball, and they spent countless hours playing together.
There's something captivating about witnessing gentleness, about watching someone powerful choosing to wield their power with tenderness. This is true when we see animals like gorillas being gentle, and it's true of human beings as well. Gentleness is captivating because it's not necessarily natural or easy. Being gentle, especially in the world that we live in today, requires considerable strength. The strength to resist the seductive lure of oppressive power, the strength to slow down and tune into our own thoughts and feelings, the strength to act in ways that are intentional and in alignment with our beliefs and values, the strength to prioritize the well-being of another or the long-term health of a relationship over what may feel good in the moment, the strength to exercise wisdom and restraint. M. Craig Barnes, President Emeritus of Princeton Theological Seminary and author of The Pastor as Minor Poet, puts it this way. We tend to think of gentleness as a weak or fragile thing, but as a virtue, it arises from strength, from strong people who choose to honor the sacredness of their relationships. The gentle don't find their strength in the ways society has privileged them, nor in the success of their pursuits on the many fields of competition. Among Christians, the gentle find their strength in their identity as people created in the image of God, people whom Jesus Christ was dying to love. When we take seriously the holiness of our lives redeemed from everything we've done to profane that holiness, we're made strong in the grace of God. And those who have attended to the grace they have received tend to want to be gracious to others. So according to Barnes, our faith can help us to find the inner strength that will allow us to act gently with others. When we recognize that our worthiness comes not from our actions or our accomplishments or our possessions, but instead is rooted in the unconditional love of God. When we remember that the Spirit of God is always with us, ready to help us find stillness and peace, then we can move through the world with a little bit more freedom. Like the freedom to let go of the need to prove ourselves, to come out on top, or to exercise power over. The freedom to love, to be gracious, to honor the sacredness of our relationships, to be gentle with ourselves and with others. I want to be clear that being gentle does not mean being a pushover or never standing up for ourselves or what we believe in. If you remember, a few weeks ago, I actually gave a sermon about how boundaries are a crucial component of generosity, and I think the same is true of gentleness. Jesus himself was by no means a pushover, but his life was marked by gentleness. There's a Greek word used in the Bible, praeos, that means gentle. You also sometimes see this word translated as meek or humble. In the Beatitudes, Jesus includes gentleness among the counterintuitive, countercultural values that he considered blessed. He said, "Blessed are the gentle, for they will inherit the earth." Later, Jesus used this same word to describe himself as gentle, saying, "Come to me, all you who are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And then we see this word again when Jesus entered Jerusalem on a donkey on the way to his death. Matthew tells us this took place to fulfill what had been spoken through the prophet Zechariah. "Tell the daughter of Zion, look, your king is coming to you, gentle and mounted on a donkey, and on a colt, the foal of a donkey. Throughout his life, Jesus chose to wield his power with tenderness, at times choosing challenge, confrontation, and defiance, at other times embracing weakness for the sake of love. Jesus had the strength to stand up for the marginalized, and he also had the strength to forego violence, to choose forgiveness, and to embody power with instead of power over. Jesus' ability to move through the world this way was connected to his own relationship with power. Philippians 2 tells us that though he existed in the form of God, Jesus did not regard equality with God as something to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, assuming human likeness. And being found in appearance as a human, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. For the sake of unconditional love, Jesus relinquished equality with God in order to be with us as a human being. Jesus entered the world as a helpless infant. He lived and ministered and died in order to show us the heart of God, to teach us about the upside-down nature of the kingdom, to help us learn how to live lives of fullness, to inspire us to co-create a more just world for ourselves and for others. As Barnes points out, that's not a story of the weak being victimized. It's a story of the strong choosing humility. To live in Christ is to find this same gentle calling. Many in our culture consider gentleness to be a liability. However, the greater liability may actually be our inability to be gentle. Barnes argues that most social problems are rooted in the failure of the strong to be gentle with others. He says, in these days of intense factionalism and demonizing partisanship, few of us are aspiring to gentleness. I think that is mostly because we're afraid. We're afraid because instead of thinking about the holy between us, we think about the them who are to blame for our problems. The last thing we want is to be gentle in dealing with them. The harsh reality is that since the day Cain rose up against Abel, we have never been as careful with each other as we were created to be. The Bible's first story of life outside paradise is about violent conflict between brothers, and we haven't done much to improve on the plot. Pretty much every social problem we know has roots in the failure of the strong to be gentle with others. It is far easier to use our power to lash out, to control, to coerce, than it is to be gentle. But this is not the way of love. It's not the way of Jesus. And in a bit of irony, it turns out that in many cases, using strength in this way doesn't actually help us to get what we want. So as we work toward a vision of being able to strategically exercise gentleness with anyone and everyone, I'd like to suggest, what if we start with ourselves and with those that we love? What might it be like to treat gentleness as an asset that can help us move toward things that we value, things like deeper connection? One tool that I have found particularly helpful when seeking to grow in this area comes from Drs. John and Julie Gottman. The Gottmans are known for their research around what allows relationships to be healthy and long-lasting. In particular, they've done a lot of work on marital stability and divorce prediction. And while they focus primarily on romantic relationships, I found that their advice can be applied to many, many different types of relationships. So through their research, they have found that by observing just the first 3 minutes of a conflict discussion, they could predict the likelihood of a couple's divorce in just the first 3 minutes. The couples who divorced started their discussions with a great deal of negative emotion and displayed far fewer expressions of positivity than those who stayed together 6 years later. Not only were those couples who divorced negative towards each other, but they were also critical of each other. So criticism is what the Gottmans call one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, alongside contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And each of the four horsemen, or relationship killers, they suggest an antidote for each of them, a practical skill that you can use to combat that tendency and strengthen your relationships. So the skill designed to combat criticism is called a gentle startup or a soft startup. The Gottmans have found that, in general, conversations tend to end on the same note that they begin. So if you start an argument with a harsh attack, in most cases, you'll end up with at least as much tension that you started with, if not more. So to avoid this, it helps to intentionally start the conversation with some gentleness. A gentle startup begins with understanding the difference between a complaint and criticism. And according to the Gottmans, a complaint focuses on a specific behavior, but criticism attacks a person's very character. So to stay in the realm of complaint, it helps to be mindful of your tone and your nonverbal communication. For example, try to avoid things like eye rolling. Another tip is to try to use I statements that express what you feel or what you observe or what you need in a positive way rather than using blaming you statements. So, for example, it's more helpful to say something like, I seem to be the only one chasing after the baby today, than it would be to make an accusation or judgment like, you never watch the baby. Sometimes during conflict, we forget to be appreciative or polite. Understandably, we're in conflict. But according to the Gottmans, this is actually when we need to do this more than ever. Their research has shown that there's a magic ratio of 5-to-1. And so this means that for every negative interaction during a conflict, a stable and happy marriage has 5 or more positive interactions to balance that out. So simple ways to kind of add some more positive interactions into the conversations are to add phrases like please and I appreciate it. Those can be helpful for maintaining warmth and emotional connection during a conversation. And one final tip for gentle startups is to not store things up. It's far easier to enter a conflict conversation with gentleness when we're discussing just one issue, instead of a long list of complaints that have built up and now we're at our breaking point. Also, on the receiving end, having someone confront you with a list of complaints can be overwhelming. It can cause emotional flooding and can make it impossible to have a productive conversation. So, as we've been moving through this sermon series, we've ended each sermon with a bit of time for processing and reflection, for engagement. Each week this has looked a little bit different. So today, I want us to spend some time engaging with this tool of the Gottman Gentle Startup. I have an article for you to read that will be passed around the room, and for those tuning in via live stream, there's a link that you can go to. But what I'd love is if you could read through the article, take note of what stands out to you, and then try out the strategy for yourself. So somewhere on the page, I invite you to practice writing out a criticism and a complaint, just so you can get a feel for what the difference is between those. And on the screen, I've shared an example of each for you to refer to as you do that, and also a format that you can use. So we'll put on some reflective music and spend about 7 minutes engaging in this time of processing, and then I'll come back up to the stage and bring us back together for communion and for some musical worship. All right, so yes, handout should be coming around. At this point, I'd like to invite the worship team to come back up to the stage. And